I have a little review I want to do here. First, I'm going to make, much as I really enjoy seeing everybody, I'm going to hide you so that I can also be looking just at the image. I want to go back just a little bit more with Stuart Davis, partly to read a quote from him. And then we'll spend a lot of time on Edward Hopper because I simply cannot drag myself away. And I'm going to assume how I react is how most people react. And then we'll go on to Charles Schuyler. From many critics, it's Stuart Davis and Edward Hopper who are considered the sort of the greatest of the modern American artists from at least the first half of the 20th century. They, curiously enough, however different their work looks, they studied with the same teacher at the New York School of Fine and Applied Arts, and that was that Robert Henry, who was interested in showing the nitty-gritty of ordinary life rather than the high-flown academic art taught in the National Academy. And they are from about the same time, although Stuart Davis is a little bit younger. They didn't overlap in the school. Their work could hardly be more different from one another. So one of the comments from Stuart Davis that came back to me only after the end of the last class was a remark he made to someone when he returned from his one trip to Paris in the late 20s. He spent a couple of years there. He said when he came back, he felt he was the equal of any of the Parisian avant-garde whose work he'd seen. And he also made a kind of, it sounds like a more spontaneous comment, said that one thing he enjoyed about being in Paris was that there being an artist didn't feel like being a bum. So he was, much as he came from an art-oriented background, he was well aware of the main American, should we say, reserve about the fine arts and the idea of being an artist. That American reputation was still of being very no-nonsense, practical, pragmatic, industry-oriented and business-oriented. Well, the reason I brought back this particular work, this one from 1930 that I showed you at the beginning last time, just this American scene, was to encourage you sometime. Now, let's see, I'm going to have to use this time. To go up to the up to the Montclair Art Museum. Of course, there's nothing you can get into there now, and it'll. This work is not always up there, but this is a painting by Stuart Davis. It's called A Landscape in the Colors of a Pear, done in 1940. And let's see if I can do this now. He based this. This is one that he reworked. This. Look for the tree, look for some stuff up here. Look for the masts. There'll be the sense of here, it's a picket fence, but like there's something like a fence in it. See there? The masts, the tree. And this is a habit he had throughout his career, which was to go back and rework as his ideas in art, his color interests, his interest in line as opposed to shapes, the way he wove shapes together as it changed. He would, just as if he's taking the motif from something in jazz, take it and rework it and embellish it and alter it. So as I, from last time, that he did think that jazz was the premier American contribution to the worldwide cultural scene. And then this mural we saw, the, I just remind you of the name of it. So it's just called Swing Landscape. Having said this, I pondered this a little. How totally amazing. This was paid for by the government. And this, if you remember, was for a mural to go in the meeting room in government-sponsored housing in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. So it'd be low-income housing. Why would they think this was the kind of painting that would be what people wanted in the middle of the 30s? That's probably one reason it was never put up in place and is now in the collection of the University of Indiana. But it is a splendid work, and the overall feature I want to remark about this time, it's maybe just me talking here, but I think you can sense just the vitality, the exuberance, a kind of an optimistic mood, quite apart from the subject, from the colors, the liveliness, the sort of staccato rhythms in this. It's very good-natured. And there's something else I said last time. You see, he's still bringing in motifs of the sea there. Imagine from the sail, those lines I would certainly read as water. I mentioned a lobster trap down here. There are a few other, what do you call that, a bollard, where you wrap the ropes around. A few other forms here you could see. I think this is, I don't know, quite over here. Well, what's that doing in Williamsburg? This has something to do with Davis's believing other people thought and approached the world the way he did. He said in his memory at any time, as he thought of the flux of things, the way they went through his mind, he would think about a memory from one place and then something going on in someplace else, and then that they would all coalesce and merge and move around. So that for him is city life, urban life, memories of the past, something coming, that would be the American experience. So he thought in this, he was connecting with everyone. Here are three quotes from him I want to give you. I paint what I see in America. In other words, I paint the American scene. And the art of painting is not a duplication of experience, but the extension of experience on the plane of formal invention. And finally, and this is, I think, what I'm trying to make everybody believe, is the kind of like deep optimism under here in the depths of the Depression. Davis says, modern art is a reflection of the positive, progressive fact of modern industrial technology. And we'll go beyond that. Only one more I wanted to show you this time. It's called American Painting, to give you some clear proof that these, for all they're looking as spontaneous as jazz is supposed to sound, although it isn't always that spontaneous either. I want to give you the dates for this painting. He started it in 1932, then he reworked it again from 1942 to 1944. And the one point here that's so unusual, you have people, clearly recognizable people. And I think they're meant to be workers. I think this was to, well, it's not just me, I'm reading this as a supposition that in response to the federal government emphasis on the worker and making art accessible for everybody, and with the other muralists like Ben Shahn, this is his version of doing the equivalent. All right. So that marvelous artist we leave behind to someone who is something else. This is when, with him, I most was like, oh, shoot, for doing this on Zoom. I'm so glad we are, but I would think having a conversation and a long time looking at these would be a treasure. So I'm not going to unmute, I believe, because I think with this many people, it can get too hectic. So I don't know. I'm just going to try to go with my gut about how long we're looking at a particular painting and then what you see. Here, of course, what you have is a portrait of him, which you can look at while I tell you a little about him first. He was born just north of the city, and his father had Nyack. His father had a not very successful business. Was essentially a great thinker and a dreamer, loved literature, Russian literature, French literature, English literature. And his mother was something of an art enthusiast. And they encouraged Hopper's interest in art. But as many parents of students I had at William Patterson, they wanted their child to be able to earn a living. So he was first sent to a school learning illustration. That was a common practice, I guess, through all times. He didn't take well to it. But until he was about 40, his primary income came from doing illustrations, sometimes etchings or engravings. Commercial illustrations he was not very good at, but illustrations for books. He did posters during World War I, but he was pretty wretched. He was unhappy doing that. Well, what choice did he have? So it wasn't till he was, let me give you a little more. So I said before, he was a pupil of Robert Henry. He, like Davis, had a work in the Armory show, and unlike Davis, he did sell one, but then that's the last thing he sold for several decades. He took something down to Gloria Vanderbilt Whitney when it was still the Whitney Studio Club before it was a museum, and she showed his work, but that did not generate any sales either. It was not until the 1920s. Remember, he was born in 1882. In the early 20s, he picked up a whole bunch of his watercolors, which he was doing. He was branching off into oils and watercolors then. He took them to another gallery in Manhattan. The gallery owner accepted them, displayed them, and the whole show sold out. So that was a complete reversal. And after that, he stopped doing illustration. It was also about the time he got married. And I'll show you a work that benefited from his marriage. And I'm going to talk about his marriage in just a moment. But first, while you're just looking at this man, this is a portrait he did in the years between 1935 and 1940. And he based it on a self-portrait he did back in 1918. An etching he did. A sort of keenly probing look toward us. And it reminds me of something I wanted to say. He had been to Europe. He was utterly, in Paris, evidently impervious to all the currents of Matisse, Picasso, and all the latest just emerging in Parisian avant-garde. What did he like? He liked Degas. Monet. And most of all, when he went to the Netherlands, he saw Rembrandt's Night Watch, and that blew him away. So you're not going to expect him to be cutting edge in terms of new style. He's much more in the long line of probing humanist artists. Oh, well, let's go back here. I wish I could show you both of these at once, but opposed to that alert outward gaze, he's just sort of taking us in, isn't he? What's going on here? In both of them, one very interesting feature is that there is nothing that would tell you that this man is a painter. You see none of the trappings of a studio. He's dressed as if he's ready to go outside. The setting gives you no clues at all. And he's a much more appraising look now, isn't it? It's like, you have a sense, I have a sense, of this man's having some kind of an inner life that he's not, well, he's keeping it within. And then there's a feature in Hopper's art that's alluded to when I say how much he's blown away by the Rembrandt, is his interest in light. And as I go through the works, that's something easy to overlook. But this light and shade, which makes the figure look three-dimensional, is marvelous glowing light in here, and it just seems to sense that actuality is often not as realistic as it seems. And I mentioned that also last time with Sunday morning, which I'll show you again later. But here sometimes, well, so this is so I'm looking at this a lot, of course. So here's the shadow just around the corner to the door. Fine. Now there's this light. Where do you suppose that light is generated? Because is this then this where it's darker? Is that him casting a shadow? If so, it's kind of strange because the greatest amount of light is here on his neck. So that would suggest the light is fairly low over here. And if it is, this isn't quite the angle that the shadow would be. Something very Rembrandtian in this is the way the dark shadowed eye, which he learned from Rembrandt, many other artists were doing this too, that increases the sense of that person having an inner life when you can't make it out all so clearly. Now, so there's the man. So let me tell you a little about the man. You can go on looking and enjoying that painting. I wanted to talk about his no, I guess I am going to give you another picture. Oh, I don't want to go that way here. In the 20s, about the time he gets to leave the world of illustration, he married this woman named Jo Nivison, who had been a fellow student in the school with Robert Henry. They hadn't kept contact, but then they did again. And she was a painter and an actress, and I think you can even see from this picture of him, where he looks almost surly, he was laconic, noted for his extreme silences. And she was quite effusive. And then you look at her gesture. These are a pair. She put aside her career to further his. She handled all the business, all the interface with the world, kept track of his paintings, controlled access of critics and journalists to him, was a fine critic of his work. So they were quite a pair. I guess there was sometimes, I read, that was a fairly stormy pair, but a pair. But one thing she said once is just like she said, oh, talking to Eddie is like dropping a stone down the well, only you never hear it hit bottom. They led very frugal lives. And it's even sort of apparent in this austere, small house they built in Truro, where they loved to spend their summers up on Cape Cod. He'd earlier been in Gloucester and other places in Maine. But so here she is back here, the supportive figure in himself. You might get a sense there that he was a tall guy, 6'5". His typically cruel adolescent classmates called him, it's really funny. I mean, it's like adolescents can be funny. They called him Grasshopper. So he was never involved in any of the government programs in the 30s or 40s. They lived a very abstemious life. I read that they bought their clothes at Sears and Woolworths and ate out of cans. And when in the city, they always lived in the 4th floor walk-up in Greenwich Village. And his work sold very well. So he never was needed to respond to any outward commissioning forces for anything he did. So now we'll start in with some of his paintings, and I will have some comments too. Laconic as he was when he spoke, it was like, whoa, okay. So this is an early painting he did that's back when he was working with Robert Henry. So it's just an urban street scene, which looks terribly much like people are doing social distancing, doesn't it? It was just too funny. But the clarity of the structure of this is quite, and the fact that these are people are just, they're people, but they're not individuals. They're just dark spots with a flesh-colored area at the top. There's that kind of reticence that he has that would not certainly not be true of Stuart Davis. So here's one work back when he was still doing etchings and engravings in the earliest part of the 20s. And this is called, the titles never tell you very much. It's just East Side Interior. But this is a theme that, a motif and a theme that comes up again and again and again in his work. Now, there are many landscapes he did, beautiful landscapes, but I'm not going to, we're focusing on the figural scenes mainly. So here's a seamstress just paused in her work, looking out the window at, well, that is totally up to you. He leaves this just the blinding light of the space there. You see down the steps and nothing. And the shadows all around here. So what is she seeing? What is she thinking? It must be a hot day. You see her blouse is slipped down here. She's totally unaware of anyone looking at her. He once said that he hoped the stories in these paintings were not obvious because there was none intended. So he met his wife, Jo, we met her in the 20s, and She had been accepted in an invitational show at the Brooklyn Museum, a show of watercolors. And she inveigled upon the curators to accept some from Hopper as well. And this is one by him, the Mansard Booth. So this is a watercolor from 1923. And it's in the Brooklyn Museum. This is the first work a museum ever bought of his. This interest in buildings, especially Victorian elaborate buildings, is with him all his life long. And at some much later stage, he makes a very pithy statement that what he's interested is, let me be sure I get the words exactly right. What I wanted to do was paint sunlight on the side of a house. Who lives there? Nothing, just the house. That's the character. So I talked about just being in the 30s. Well, I'm still in the 20s because this is the house that it's called The House by the Railroad from 1925. And it's a oil painting. One reason for bringing it in, well, there are a number of reasons you're going to see why, but one reason is that this is the first, maybe one of the first paintings that ever entered the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. It was bought by an anonymous donor soon after Hopper completed it in 1925. And when the new museum was founded, that person gave it to the museum. So this is a house in Haverstraw. And in fact, it is this house. Now let's see. Oh, well. Somewhere in here, I have another, in my notes, I have a quote that he always painted. He only painted what he saw. Now, you know how you have to take that with a grain of salt. If this is the house, how much more gaunt it is here. It's a person, isn't it? With this strong light shining on it. And I think it should be a house that looks kind of familiar to people. I've read that the Addams Family house is based on this. You want to know where else it occurs? And I'll come back to it here in a moment. Terrence Malick's film, The Days of Heaven from the 70s. And Psycho, the house in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is based on it. And what am I getting to by telling you that? Other than, here's what's derived from that. Throughout Hopper's career, there's an extremely close connection between film and what he paints. He himself loved the cinema. He would sometimes say when he was no longer able to paint, he would go to the movies for a week straight on end. And there's a nice YouTube video of various directors talking about their responses to Hopper's work and the way it's affect their cinematography and the way they set up a scene. So you have this house, that's its later history, but also interesting. He's cut it off at the bottom. You can see these railroad tracks. Isn't that curious? No sign, of course, of any train, no weeds growing between the tracks. So this is it's an active train. And actually he'd seen us passing by on the train. But it means that there is nothing to indicate anything about habitation down here or life going on. And sometimes people make a thing out of this, saying that, Oh, this shows the modern technology, the speed, the mobility of new life, as opposed to the past in this Victorian manor, maybe. That's for everyone to, as in all his works, to think of for themselves. Oh, and this is just my passing nod at his many landscapes. This is the Coast Guard station. And this also is belongs to the Montclair Art Museum. This is from 1929. And Montclair bought it in the 30s. Again, it's the structures, the light, the hill. And again, we're at some distance, a not particularly hospitable stretch we have to cross to get up to the house. This artist getting into his psyche. Now I want to do one more from the 20s here. This is called Night Windows, and it's in the Museum of Modern Art. It's an oil painting. It's almost 3 feet across. His paintings are simple, but oh, don't think that looking simple means it's looking easy. And it's like some really fine distilled poetry. You need to look and look and look again. But in a way, it's like, oh, should you really be looking? Because it's as if it's a voyeuristic account, isn't it? Here we're looking at a lady in her slip bending over. So this must be her bedroom. And where are we? Well, it's possible we're in the L, the elevated train with all these wonderful glimpses into people's lives. What's she doing? No way to tell. Is there anybody else there? Is this a totally private moment that she's exposing to the whole world with this window completely open, not even a shade like there is in these? Then this wonderful blowing curtain. This is a terrific breeze. Okay, well, where's that coming from? What's blowing? Where's the fan? For that matter, where's the light? It has to be a very high ceilinged building. At least this floor is here. So it's somewhere up in there. And then you have different qualities of the light shining out the windows here. You ought to be able to sort of like work back from those angles to find where the light is, but I believe it probably would not work. And then there must be another floor down here. So we're at some higher level, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. You can just vaguely see parts of the building here. It has to be less than 5 stories because this is a late 19th century structure, it looks like, but can't see what. So look at that compared to what Stuart Davis did. He did only a few lithographs, but this is one of them. And this is his 6th Avenue L from 3 years later, 1931. So this must be that he's in the garment district because there's a sewing machine, the dummy, another sewing machine. There's maybe cast iron architecture. This is one of the columns for it. What are these? Rolls of cloth, maybe? Barber pole. Other buildings. Fire escapes. Maybe this is where you got your ticket for the subway. I mean the L. So what he's doing is showing, oh, you rush by scenes, you see a little of this, you see a little of that, there's this. It's like a montage of bits as opposed to this entirely. mysterious. As if still glimpsed at a second, though. I wanted to say, this occurred to me too, you know, all these lights we're seeing, well, you know, in the 30s, at least in the Midwest, rural electrification was still going on. I mean, not every place had lights. So these lights are a sign of great modernity. And there's that early Sunday morning, which we talked about last time. One of the curious features that I mentioned now, if this is 7th Avenue, it's a light from someplace else that's creating this shadow. And interesting is how that angle is different from what's coming down here to this long, long shadow. So the sun is really low here. The unusual feature is that the format of the painting, this brought, you know, from your cameras, this is the landscape format. It's most artists by this time were enamored of Manhattan with its being a city of skyscrapers and tall buildings and canyons, rather than this kind of pastoral sense that you get in this kind of format. So now we're looking at a painting from the 30s. This is, it's just called A Room in Brooklyn. And this is in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. This is the whole painting. What do you suppose she's doing? You see her head is tilted. I don't know if she's close enough that to the window that she could be looking out and down. To me, it seems more like she's reading or doing some kind of handwork there. The light streams in somehow at a slightly different angle there than when it hits the rug here. And you have the idea that infinitely extending low-rise buildings of the city. You look across here. What a play in colors. Look how he shifts it. That blue from this blue from this blue. He's for sure looked at Dutch painting of the 17th century. Now this is Room in New York, same year, 1932. These are all oils. This is about, it's just slightly larger, about 40 inches across, and no, 3 feet really. This is in University of Nebraska, and I've got something to lighten the mood showing you next. But what movie maker wouldn't be drawn to something like this? You have to have a story. What's going on? She's just idly fingering a key. Looks like she's dressed to go out. He's absorbed in the paper, that high light, casting some bright light there on his blonde hair, the back of his chair. That highlight is then, you see it thinning out over here. Well, okay, hold on to your seats for what comes next. This is Norman Rockwell, Breakfast Table. You can see it's from the Saturday Evening Post, 1930, so just 2 years earlier. What a different take And you can't tell me it's just because this is what they're like in the morning and this is what they're like at night. Because Norman Rockwell, as he's working for the Saturday Evening Post, has to create work that pleases people, that gives a story that everyone can understand. As this woman who's quite put upon, as her husband is so engrossed in that before he going to go to the train station there, he's got his satchel and his hat ready to go. And so she's looking fairly long-suffering about it. No intimation that there's any kind of economic distress at this time or social upheaval at this time. This is the assurance of life as it ought to be. So Hopper paints for himself. It's about time for another quote. This is something from Goethe that it was a quote that he kept in his wallet always. And it was sort of like a touchstone for him. It's about literature, but he applied it to art, of course. The beginning and end of all literary activity is the reproduction of the world that surrounds us by means of the world that is in one. All things being grasped, related, recreated, molded, and reconstructed in a personal form and an original manner. Oh, well, I will give you the other, we're not at the end of his career by any means, but this is in the 1950s. He could be pretty waspish. Great art, so 50s, that's when abstract expressionism has emerged on the scene. He says, great art is the outward expression of an inner life in the artist. And this inner life will result in his personal vision of the world. One of the weaknesses of much abstract painting is the attempt to substitute the inventions of the intellect for a pristine, imaginative conception. The inner life of a human being is a vast and varied realm and does not concern itself alone with stimulating arrangement of color, form, and design. So you get that, you AbX people. This is 1939. It's called New York Movie Girl. Those moments of introspection and isolation that prevail in his work. So here's something in the movie. There are two people here. This must be a matinee. There's so few people here in the day. She might be listening, thinking. By this almost like a bulwark between here, the wall, separated from what's going on over here. A little bit of gleams of light there. Look at the sketch he did for it. And notice, well, of course, here he hasn't really worked out putting in people, and this is a much more straight on, not the oblique view that the painting finally has. But look at her, she's just, their arms crossed there, this kind of like, yeah, bored, job. And that. This is in the Museum of Modern Art. This is in 1940, it's just called Gas. And it's in Museum of Modern Art as well. It's a scene from near Truro, so one of the, when he was out on the Cape. Evidently it's based on two different gas stations. And this same kind of like isolation, the attendant is what, sort of futzing with a hose here. No cars, no suggestion any car's been along here any time recently. The light shining out from the station, and that casts a cast light here. Don't know where this light comes from over here. That twilight hour, right? a few clouds. This is Office at Night from 1940. And this has been, I think it was a source of a subject for a film, and has, well, there have been various recreations of it. This is in a museum in Minneapolis, another oil painting. First, let me show you the drawing for this one. So as if made by someone standing in the room, and he's just seeing an office scene. He generally worked partly from live models. He used his wife always as the model for the women, no matter what the women looked like in the final works. And then he also made a lot of sketches and sometimes sort of mock-ups of what he was going to do. But this great oblique slice is extremely disorienting. Doesn't it make her, with her very curvaceous body, she towers over this fellow. So it's as if there's a story that we're coming in the middle of. Look how carefully he even shows the color of her nylons, as opposed to the flesh. Where's that light come from? What's coming in the window that goes at that angle? Comes around the corner. Then that was 1942. You know, I'd be remiss if you didn't get to see this. Is a work called Nighthawks. And that's in the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was bought by the museum practically before the paint was even dry on it. And it's a big painting. It's 5 feet across. Well, so this was 1942. I'll tell you, I kept track of how much the museum bought it for, $3,000. So I'm not the first person to think that he's a fine painter. I have one of his sketches for it, and then I also want to read you some of the kind of notes his wife kept on scenes on this painting. She said, night, brilliant interior of cheap restaurant. And I will tell you, this is the kind of restaurant where they went to eat. Bright items, cherry wood counter and tops of surrounding stools, light on metal tanks at rear right, brilliant streak of jade green, tiles, 3/4 across canvas at base of glass window, curving at corner. Oh yeah, well, I told you last time those curved windows are the sign of the modern style. Light walls, dull yellow ochre door into kitchen right. Very good looking blonde boy in white, inside counter. Girl in red blouse, brown hair, eating lunch. Now, Jo herself posed for that. Man, night hawk, and originally this night hawk, not as one word, but as hawk was separate, and this is because he had a hawky beak. In dark suit, steel gray hat, black band, blue shirt, clean, holding cigarette. Other figure dark, sinister, back at left. Light sidewalk outside, pale greenish, dark red brick house opposite. Sign across top of restaurant, dark Phillies 5-cent cigar. Picture of cigar. Outside of shop, dark, green. Note, bit of bright ceiling inside shop against dark of outside street at edge of stretch at top of window. Yes, I think that's what she's talking about. Is it detail? Well, let's get the detail first. There's the hawky beak. Doesn't it look like something for Hitchcock? They do look like together apart. And before we look at the sketch again, notice their positions and this man's position and the slight, oh. See, he sits more upright. He's not involved, looking down, and they seem to turn toward one another. So all the sort of straightforward narrative quality, the sort of daylight aspects of it for the night scene are what he abolished. Oh, we're gonna get to the end and never get poor Philip Schuyler. Oh my, well, I'll have to say hello, goodbye to him next time. Maybe say hello to him today anyway. This is a late work by Hopper called Rooms by the Sea. It's in the University Art Gallery at Yale, and it's from 1951. I brought it in because it's a very strange painting, and also to encourage you to go to the YouTube. The Yale University Art Gallery has superlative lecture series that are on YouTube. And there's a lecture by a man named John Walsh, who focuses primarily on this painting, and then he brings in some others of Hopper's and talks about him in general. One of the features in this is that he had someone who is, I think, an architect, try to recreate the rooms, and there's simply no way you could have this light come in from this window, and this all around, nothing in here works except as a painting, which is still an enigma, because this water, it's like something surreal, isn't it? Where do you go? There's nothing, no surroundings. Are you at the water? Are you so high up you can't see what's going on? It's like something completely separate from this still personless environment in here. Hopper gave it an alternate title called The Jumping Off Place. And I had one comment from Mark Rothko, because this is the time of abstract expressionism when he's doing this. This is his response to it. We saw Schuyler's before. Rothko said, I hate diagonals, but I like Hopper's diagonals. They're the only diagonals I like. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to I don't know who to sacrifice for the sake of our lectures. This is Charles Schuyler. You see, his dates are almost the same as Hopper's. And I'm going to zip through just one work, and then I will do some with him next time before we do the social realists. Schuyler was he's trained in industrial art. He's from Philly. He trained in industrial art, and then he went to art school, and his kind of like interest in things and precision is a hallmark of his style. And in fact, he's called a precisionist artist. But he early on took up photography because it's a way to make money. He's a self-taught photographer. And this is a photograph he took of a German ship. You see, he loves machinery. And this is the painting from it, from 1929. So let me give you a hint of what's to come, maybe by this. This is a painting by his. I'll tell you what the subject is, and then we'll come back next time. This is the River Rouge Ford Motor Factory plant just outside Detroit. It employed 75,000 people, covered thousands of acres, was the largest factory in the world at the time it was made. And I'll show you what was manufactured here. Let's see, let's go on, get to that first. This. It's where the first Model A was made. So when I come back to Schuyler, what we're going to see, what I will emphasize, is his work as a paean to industry, not the human cost of industry, which then we will segue into after that, but instead the sheer glory of machinery, its scale, its elegance, the ingenuity, the production capacity from machinery. Oh, I've got 2 minutes. Oh, I can't waste 2 minutes, right? I'll show you the plant. The Ford Motor Company hired him as a photographer in the 1927 to come for 6 weeks and just to document it for their advertising campaign. And these are Schuyler's photographs. What does he, this is not Schuyler's photograph. His are all about the splendor of machinery. He said, modern factories are our cathedrals. And the human turmoil attended on those and the unemployment that came in the 30s interested him not one whit. This is a view of a photograph taken of striking workers in 1932 from that plant. So that's the way I set you up for the next class. So we move from some Schuyler, and I will limit what you see on them, force myself to do that. And then we'll look at quite a few, not as social realists, not so much as their individual careers, but for the kind of art that they produced. And that is it for today. I will, if you want to put anything in the chat, take that.
Thank you, Maggie.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm here. Anybody's got a question, I can take it now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good to
Maggie.
be back.
Thank you,
Thank you, Maggie.
Good to
Sure,
see
sure.
you.
Oh, I wish we were doing this in person.
Would be much, yeah.
This
We
was
do too.
wonderful, Maggie.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
We do too. We wish you were in person.
Yeah,
In the fall.
I have one comment.
yeah.
I have one
And
comment.
questions. Oh, I love
Just a
questions.
question and a comment.
Yeah.
If I had to put his Hopper's paintings in
how
musical
you doing?
terms, I would put them in a minor key.
Yeah,
They all look as if they are. There are no primary colors. They're all all colors are muted. They're all.
No, well, this phone is, I got a busy signal.
oh.
What?
So, okay, so you'd say put them in the minor key. I kept thinking of them in terms of poetry. You know, they're like
It's
so lapidary, like just a little bit, and then a pause, and then a little bit.
they are.
Maggie, this is Doris. One of those pictures you showed us
Okay, just some frustration.
like,
What?
look like Wyatt pictures from Hopper.
Yeah.
Oh, the one of the barn?
Yes.
Maybe.
Well, they do have a very similar style when they have that kind of precision. Yeah. More, anybody?
Yes, I wanted to tell you, I went on a tour
Okay.
on the Cape,
Yeah.
in Truro and probably a little bit in Wellfleet.
Okay.
They gave this wonderful woman who actually knew him from
It was
childhood,
warmer earlier, I think,
was
but
giving a tour. And she
um,
would take you to a building that he painted or a house that he painted and show
Yeah.
you what he painted, and then
Mhm.
have the painting in her booklet that she showed you. It was
Mhm.
wonderful. It was
Oh.
about 3 years ago. I don't know if she's still doing it,
okay.
but it was incredible.
I'd say
Sounds
if
good.
for people who are not participating in conversation,
Okay.
they should probably mute or leave.
Great. Sounds good.
But if you want to talk, please stay on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you repeat where we can find that YouTube lecture by John Walsh?
Oh, you know, I'm no good at this. I simply went to YouTube and I put on the search Hopper and Edward Hopper. And then for me, it came up right away. And when the minute I see University Art Gallery or John Walsh's name, I just seize on it because I know it's going to be great.
Okay, I can do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? We're on our way out.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Maggie.
Goodbye.
Good class. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Bye.
Bye.
Maggie, could I get the recording? Because I wasn't able to connect all the way through.
You have, I don't know how to get the recording, but I know
Oh, okay.
someone evidently saw it. I don't know, is it on? Someone said they were just going through.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, TV
It's on
34.
YouTube.
Okay,
Really?
I'll check it out.
I think it was, I got the idea, maybe it was on. channel
Okay, I'm
34 or
gonna
something.
type it. If we could, it's
But you can email Katie York.
I'm gonna put it on the chat right now.
You got it?
Everybody dropped out. It was 17, now it's 20. She's showing the worst shit.
Okay, that's where you go. To get the recording, it takes a day or so.
Look down at the numbers, 70 to 20,
Man, I don't know how to do
and
this.
close it down. Oh, is that funny? Look what she just know.
I think I have to get out of share before I can even see chat.
She's down to 9 people. How do you leave the meeting? Oh, I see.
Down at the bottom, there'll be one that just says leave meeting.
So I hope
Okay,
the person
Margaret,
who wanted the recording can see the
You know, do you have my email? Would you email that to me?
oh the address. No, I don't have your email.
Okay, it's Maggie Rothman. This is like letting the whole world know, right? Maggie
Well,
Rothman 8 at Gmail.
Maggie MAGGIE
IE.
Rothman
And then for 8.
at Gmail.
Uh-huh.
Okie doke. I'll do that right now.
Thank you.
It takes a day or so for them to get it up there, but last week's is there.
Maggie,
Yeah, I'm here. Oh, myself. Yeah. What?
I'm just fascinated by the relationship of Papa with his wife.
Yes.
That's
I
a
cannot wait till the
whole
library is
other
open so we can get his biography because, yeah, it was definitely a partnership with its ups and downs.
Yes, yes.
But she managed his career. She managed his career.
And she was such an artist herself.
Yeah. She just put it to one side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really magnanimous.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maggie.
Sure. Okay. Goodbye. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just sent you the link to the film.
Thank you.
So if anybody wants to go and pass it along.
Internal broadcast system, whatever it's called, the TV programming they do. Right, but that's what they give.
Okay, so you got the link. I don't have to send it. The Lifelong Montclair.
No, well, no, you better send it because I'm just seeing what else is going on here. I'm on my way out. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Goodbye.